what's most consequential about the drift, the political drift of what's going on and the fears for the future? Or is that too scary? What's pertinent to you?
I would say, as far as for the community, a lack of like fair communication coming out of South Building, which is the administrative building here, is leaving a lot of people worried. Like they don't feel like they're being led; that they're just kind of like being told what to believe and then to accept that. I just don't think that's a particularly good leadership style, and I think if you talk to enough people on this campus, you will realize that people are worried about the future of UNC, the future of academic freedom here, and like what the school is going to look like in a decade. And the university has just not done a good job at like quelling those fears or responding to those fears, in my opinion.
So, do you see a trend? Is there? Is it getting worse or?
I mean, it's a little bit hard to say just because we haven't been here for 50 years, and I know there's been really rough times for the university. I mean, we're right across the street from where the speaker ban protest happened and that kind of thing. But it does seem like since Holden Thorpe left 4.5 years ago, and the amount of spending on PR, on public relations since then has gone way up. And the way the communications, they've become, in some ways, I guess you could say professionalized, but that's not really good for a public university. They've become like very polished, very, like Tyler said, only what they want you to hear. And so that has definitely gotten worse.
So the big current issues are what? Sexual aggression attacks, and also academic or athletic academics.
Athletic academics and just academic freedom on its own, which, I mean, like, so the J. Smith example does involve athletics. I think it doesn't have to. You can see problems on campus that have nothing to do with sports, like the environmental collaboratory, that's the new environmental study center that seems to have a lot of General Assembly ties, which is weird.
Yeah, and even like last year, there was a 9/11 literature class that thankfully nothing happened to, but there was a lot of pushback both from the legislator and some students on campus to have it canceled. And it like made Fox News and like other national media publications. So even without just like administrative pressures, there's still societal pressures to censor a lot of classes, which there's always been examples of that, but it's just worrying whenever it happens.
I mean, there's always going to be like topics that are taught in the classroom that are going to be politicized, but I think the key is for the administration to, stand with those professors. Not necessarily like outwardly endorse what they're teaching. That's fine. They don't have to do that. But they at least need to say like it's their right to do what they want in the classroom.
Unlike History 383.
Yes. And I think History 383 goes beyond politics because it was a class that had a lot of criticisms of UNC. Like Professor Smith definitely commented on the academic scandal and how it was a blemish on his university's reputation. And it seems like the university isn't willing to protect people's right to criticize the university. Where if you are starting to speak out against things happening here, you're rather going to be said you're disloyal to UNC or you're just like wrong without any like real response. Like the example that comes to my mind is we've had a couple of letters to the editor criticizing Roy Williams, which I personally disagreed like with the content of the letters, but I think people should be able to criticize Coach Williams. And we got a letter to the editor response from a PR person at the university that just said like these opinions are baseless. But he didn't tell us why they were baseless. He just tried to assert that they were, and I think that's pretty indicative of how like the entire PR strategy works. Is mainly just tell people they're wrong without any real like rebuttal to why that is.
So what do you think is going on? Is apathy ruling because no one is showing up here for your meeting that was on the editorial page at the last sentence on your editorial page piece explaining the placement of the big editorial?
Yes.
Was that Thursday or Tuesday?
It was on Wednesday.
Wednesday.
I think it's timing, mostly. I mean, I think it's timing and that, not to just sound like, oh, the young people are weird, but like, we have seen responses to it on social media. Like, I am pretty confident that a lot of people read it, and it's a Saturday afternoon, and Linda's is closed, so some people might have realized that, even though we didn't realize that.
Yeah, and I think like we talked about like how we didn't expect that many people to come to this. It was just good to have in case somebody was really upset that they would have a chance to respond. But as far as students coming, like everybody's studying for exams right now. So we were just more concerned to be able to say like, hey, we did it, in case people did say like, oh, you never gave the university a chance to respond or me a chance to respond. Like, yeah, we did. We said you could write a letter to the editor or you could actually respond to us in person. So it's a little bit of just like insurance for us as well.
Yeah, I do think exams starting Monday morning is not particularly helpful.
Yeah. Were there any particular satisfactions that you got that you were maybe reluctant to broach before that you finally got the chutzpah to come up with?
To bring up?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's interesting is the editorial actually wraps together a lot of things we already talked about in like earlier, smaller editorials. And that was it was more just like we finally arrived at a thesis of, hey, these all seem like maybe disparate problems that we've been advocating against, and they actually are all kind of a piece, and that it's a trend, like you said, that we were recognizing that trend, rather than just, writing opinion pieces along the way.
Yeah, I think it's a lot harder to ignore, too, when you make it seem like a systemic issue, not just individual things, like, happening at random. Like, the privatization of student stores was bad, but, like, it's not, like, a great evil by itself. But when you kind of put it into a larger context of how the decision was made, how students at large really were included in that conversation, you begin to see like, hey, this has happened elsewhere and it continues to happen.
And how daylight grind is now Starbucks.
Yeah.
And we write about that all the time, and UNC's argument about student stores was we got scholarship money. We got a whole bunch more scholarship money, they say, from Barnes & Noble taking over. But what I wrote about in my column about why we did the editorial was that, I really, really love that UNC is accessible, that it's still, that like, Michigan's in-state prices are way, way up, and UNC has stayed like pretty reasonable. But you're not really an accessible university if once students get here, you're not supporting them, if the communications from the school are coming the way they are right now. And so it's not just about, the price.
Yeah, and we say in the editorial, like, there are merits to privatization. That's not what we're complaining about. We're complaining more about the way that privatization happened, where it was, like, a select group of students that were serving on a board that were the student representatives. And, like, I certainly didn't feel represented in that board. I know a lot of the people I've talked to didn't feel represented by that board. So it was just kind of the university surrounding themselves with people they knew were going to be in compliance. And claiming that they were inviting students to speak, but not actually inviting the skeptics to comment.
And when we say, being okay with privatization of student stores is one thing, and the university doing that is sort of a separate issue. Like the food providers in the dining hall they've been privatized for a long time, and we have our issues with that company. But it's one thing to privatize like service providers on campus. It's a very different matter to privatize research or teaching, so that's something we're also really concerned about. We've watched and written on this year how there's now, I think, in some department like a Bank of America chair, an endowed professor's chair that's corporate. And so, how do we feel about that? This is probably something we should keep an eye on. UNC should probably openly talk about how they're monitoring, freedom under those circumstances. So there's just a whole bunch of sides of the coin that we really have to watch where the money goes, and UNC is becoming less transparent, so it's harder to do that. So that's something we need to stop.
And you mentioned Winston Crisp stepping in arbitrarily on the governance of undergraduate and graduate students in your article. So do you get flashbacks of Big Brother shadow in the background?
I definitely understand why Chris thought action was needed. Like, our student government was being very petty against each other.
It was a mess.
And acting in a way that, like, you would expect more of than students. So I don't know if it's Big Brother. I think he did overstep his boundaries. Like, if he just made a statement that was like, okay, let's cut this out, that'd be one thing. But him getting involved, I think, was just, like, the administration trying to keep this out of the news, basically. where like as it got worse and worse, it did make UNC look bad. Like, are these the student leaders that UNC is producing? So I think it goes back to like image more than like control.
Yeah, I mean, the students had fought really hard for that student government freedom. Yeah, I mean, it was. I understand that he was in a really the administration to some degree, they were in a really tough situation because student government just didn't seem like it was going to be able to work it out by itself. But at least maybe a gesture toward, this happened. We never want this to happen again. Like, we never want to have to intervene again, which we didn't really see. Because it's not something you want to become routine at all.
And the dismissal of Tom Ross was probably before your watch, I would guess.
I mean, we were here. We weren't in charge.
You weren't involved in the paper at all, maybe. But there were some things that came up about that was interesting to me, maybe not to anybody else. But there was the question kept being raised about what's the excuse for getting rid of Tom? Why are they doing this? When it was clear that the chairman of the chairman of the board of governors
it was
said,
Nebraska at the time, yeah.
Yeah, he said clearly that Tom Ross does not fit our political mandate, our political view, our world view. He does not fit that. He didn't use those words, but he kind of said that, and the conversation continued to kind of deny that it was that politicized, that we can't deal with that, so we're going to keep asking him why he dismissed Tom Ross. And I couldn't understand that. Did that ring a bell with you at all?
I mean, there was like a really interesting example of sort of the Board of Governors during that time had a bunch of weird sort of choosing small rooms for their meeting or choosing rooms that were kind of inaccessible and times and locations that were kind of inaccessible. And there was one point I know where they the board really maybe the same meeting as the Tom Ross dismissal. Don't hold me to that. It was around that time where they really suddenly changed rooms. And our reporter from the Daily Tar Heel actually had to like sprint into it and was like the last person in before the door shut, and none of the protesters could get in, and it was like very like physically dramatic, which is weird at a public meeting, and not what they were obligated to do by state law. So.
Yeah, and the BOG talks a lot about illogical balance in the professorships at college, but the BOG is overwhelmingly Republican. So it shows, like, one, that they're concerned for, balance of politics. It doesn't apply to themselves, it only applies to other things. So I do think it was pretty politically motivated to get somebody a little bit more conservative in the office. I do think to President Spelling's credit, she has pushed back against him, surprisingly, like, more than we thought she would. There's certainly things I disagree with her on, but I do appreciate that she has spoken candidly with students, and, like, push back on issues she disagrees with. She definitely hasn't been somebody just going to fall in line like they thought they were, like they thought she was going to be.
And like students thought she was going to be. She's been sort of a pleasant surprise.
Right, yeah. I think that she's after staying power, maybe. She wants to last. And that's a route to survival.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
I guess the last thing I would like to say is we hear a lot from leaders on this campus that like taking political stances isn't in line with like the University of North Carolina, which I just do not think is reflective of the history of this place. I think if you look long enough at like the doctrine and what UNC believes, you're going to find a lot of leaders who are willing to take political stances. The stances I disagree with, some that I do agree with, but they took them. And to say that the University of North Carolina isn't like an inherently politicized place, just I don't think is like an accurate statement to make. Like Franklin Porter Graham, who was chancellor here in the earlier part of the 20th century, he got put on like a watch list for being a communist because he was so willing to make political statements. There's no proof that he ever was one, but it happened. And like I think that's actually pretty cool that our chancellor was willing to speak that openly about himself, that students could, one, actually understand who he was, and two, that like he accepted the consequences that came with it.
I mean, and you saw that this year with UNC's response to the Muslim travel ban. When our very first story on that, like that Monday, I think after the Friday ban, it collected like other universities, public and private, that had, immediately their first response, it was within 24 hours, was saying, we will not release, am I on the right topic? Immigration status? We will not share information about, we won't share people's immigration status.
I was just talking about the politicization in general.
I know.
Yeah, Duke released a statement
Yeah.
saying we're not going to be sharing his information.
Yeah, they were immediately saying, unless we're subpoenaed, we won't, we're gonna do everything we can to keep you safe. And what was interesting was they were saying unless we're subpoenaed. They're not saying we'll go to court for you. Like, it's not even that crazy of a statement. But UNC wouldn't even say that, and their excuse was kind of like, oh, like we don't know what we can legally do. We don't know what's legally feasible. And we're like, no, these other schools aren't. They're not they're not really going to the mat. They're just being sympathetic, and UNC couldn't even really pull that off, which is too bad. And UNC statement was late and very mild in its tone.
Yeah, I think the only declarative statement we've received this year is the one about the Bash the Fash cartoon that was put on campus. It told students to call the police if you saw activities like that, which is probably the only actionable thing other than go to campus help that we've ever seen in an email from the chancellor.
Although that one I was talking about, UNC's email about the international students, it said contact UNC Global, and I think UNC Global ended up they weren't even expecting that to be in the email, but it didn't say. UNC actually loves to say go to CAPS, go get some counseling, get some support, and they didn't even say that for this incredibly stressful, life-changing situation that was going on, which was just really out of character even for them. And you could kind of only think that it was because it was a really politicized situation in a way that they didn't like.
Yeah. Well, there are lots of people in the hiding in the woodwork of the community, like me, who really appreciate that you follow your heart rather than party line, and take a flyer like you did with the editorial.
Yeah.
And it means a lot to us. That
Glad
you guys are still alive and kicking.
I'm glad that we're still, an independent paper and that we have the right to do that, which we still get emails from people sometimes saying, I can't believe UNC is saying this, and they mean us, and we're like, we're not UNC, it's completely independent, it's been that way for a long time. But you get to have chances like this, which is pretty cool.
Good, well thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.